Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this event organized by the European Movement International and the European Women's Lobby as part of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign. And this event is held ahead of the European Movement International and the European Women's Lobby 6th edition of the annual Women of Europe Awards. The ceremony will be held tomorrow at 4 p.m. CET. And the ceremony annually highlights the contribution of women in promoting and advancing European issues. But today's event is entitled Using the Istanbul Convention to Counter Gender-Based Violence During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And it is the opportunity to discuss the protection of women's rights with high-level speakers, which we are very happy to welcome. I will start by welcoming MILENA KADIEVA. MILENA, thank you so much for joining us. You are a human rights lawyer and the director of the Gender Alternative Foundation. Can you tell us a bit more about your work?
Hello. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain what is the work that we are doing in Bulgaria. So to put it simply and shortly, the Gender Alternative Foundation is a non-governmental organization which is working with gender-based violence. We are based in Plovdiv, Bulgaria, which is the second largest city in the country. At the moment, we are a team of 15 experts. 10 of us are lawyers, and the rest of the team are psychologists and social workers. Our main area of work and expertise in gender-based violence field are domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking in human beings. What we are trying to provide to our clients in need is the following. We are providing every day free of charge legal advice, counseling and legal representation, psychological help and support, and social help and support. In addition to these ground services that we provide on a daily basis, we are having a youth program, and we are collaborating and working with all the schools in the region of Plovdiv and the municipal youth center in the city in collaboration under different projects and programs, because we believe that prevention is better to be used before the violence occurs and we are going to be dealing with its negative consequences. Most of our activities are also related to lobbying, which we are doing at national level, regional level, and international level as well. Speaking about Bulgaria, let's say for the moment, we have draft amendments of the legislation on violence against women in Bulgaria waiting for the parliament to be voted, hopefully next year, because we're going to be having a new government this year. And we are trying to provide different tools for influencing the state to change its policy and practice and financial support to the service providers of the different women's human rights organizations dealing with women and children, predominantly victims of domestic violence in the country. And for that reason, we are basically preparing on a yearly basis different shadow reports and letters, different types of research that we are presenting before the different organs and institutions of the United Nations, of the Council of Europe, and the European Union. So to put it in short, we are providing help and support to those in need being victims of violence.
Thank you so much, MILENA. And we can also know that you were the winner of the Women of Europe Awards in the Women in Action category in 2019 for all the great work that you did with the Gender Alternative Foundation. Our second guest today is FOURCANS. You work at the European Women's Lobby. Thank you so much for being here. The European Women's Lobby is our partner for this event and for tomorrow's ceremony as well. And it is the biggest network of women organization across Europe, works to influence the general public and the institutions in support of gender equality. So thank you for being here. Can you maybe tell us a bit more?
Yes, thanks very much, Ines, for this introduction and for co-organizing this event with us. We are really happy to have this pre-event to the Women of Europe Awards tomorrow. So as maybe our viewers might know, I represent the European Women's Lobby. The European Women's Lobby is the largest umbrella organization of women's organization in Europe. Together with our members, we fight against violence against women and girls since our inception 30 years ago, notably through the Observatory on Violence Against Women and Girls, which is composed of experts from throughout Europe on this very topic. And together with the experts, we obviously gather research, information about violence against women and girls, but also we campaign together, for example, and this is the topic of today, for the Istanbul Convention. You might know that the Istanbul Convention is, to date, the most comprehensive instrument or human rights instrument on violence against women and girls. And we also have campaigns at the EU level for the EU to take legislative steps right now to fight violence against women and girls. So as Ines said, we are right now within the 16 days of activism against against violence against women and girls. So this started on the 25th of November, the International Day, and will end on the 10th of December, the International Day for Human Rights. So at EWL, we are of course having a very strong online presence during this whole period of 16 days. And we are having some campaigns, particularly to the institutions. Just a quick reminder of the importance of violence against women and girls in Europe. We know that 1 in 3 women in Europe are affected by physical or sexual violence. And we know that 1 in 2 women in the EU have already experienced sexual harassment since the age of 15. So this is a very widespread phenomenon that we want to break. We want to address the root causes of it, which is the patriarchal system and the imbalance in power between women and men. So this is something that we are very committed to fight, and obviously not being discouraged by the terrible evaluation from the European Institute on Gender Equality that it will take probably at least 3 more generations to achieve gender equality in the EU. But fighting violence against women and girls is probably one of the key elements to ensure this gender equality in the European Union, and we absolutely won't rest until this is achieved. Thanks, Ines. I'm happy to develop further later.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll be very happy to hear your expertise and insights. Our third panelist is Cindy Southworth. So Cindy, you work for Meta, which is the group involving Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and you work at the Global Head of Women's Safety. So your work consists in empowering women to connect online and combat issues such as non-consensual sharing of intimate images that disproportionately impact women. And prior to this, you also have been involved in several NGOs. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about your work?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you today, especially to recognize the 16 Days of Activism to End Gender-Based Violence. Prior to joining Meta, which was formerly known as Facebook, I worked for almost 30 years to end gender-based violence. And I founded the Safety Net Technology Project at the U.S. National Network to End Domestic Violence, where we looked at all forms of technology, how to harness it, how it can be useful to survivors of violence, cyber violence, data privacy, all of those issues. And in that work, I had the pleasure of working with many European violence against women activists and NGOs, including Women Against Violence Europe and many of the networks. I'm a very proud founding board member of the Global Network of Women's Shelters, and I've stayed involved as an advisor to them in my new role. And one of the things that I do inside the company is I continue a lot of the work that I did for 10 years previously when I served on Facebook Safety Advisory Board, and I gave input and advice on features, tools, reporting, policy changes needed, and as a nonprofit voice. And now I'm inside the company working with engineers on improving our machine learning and our proactive detection, working with nonprofits all over the world. And I'm thrilled to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Our final panelist joining us today is Jackie Jones. Jackie, thank you for joining. You're a professor of feminist legal studies, specialized in ending violence against women and girls, and you were elected as an MEP for Wales in May 2019, and are now teaching at the University of Bristol and Cardiff. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about your area of work?
Thank you very much for the invitation to come. Really looking forward to the discussion from such an eminent panel as well. So yes, I was Professor of Feminist Legal Studies at the University of the West of England, specialising in ending violence against women and girls, and looking at the human rights aspects across the globe before I became an MEP, where I sat on the FAM committee, the Women's Rights and Equality Committee, and the Legal Affairs Committee. And there I was trying to put forward proposals for change to the Commission, obviously Commissioner Dalli and other MEPs in the S&D group, so in the Socialist group. I teach gender at the University of Bristol and will soon be teaching in University of Cardiff again. But at the same time, for the last 20 odd years, I've been volunteering with different women's organisations, including Welsh Women's Aid, the National Alliance of Women's Organisation, Sir Optimus International. But I was also immediate past president of European Women Lawyers Association, and lobbied hard to have different types of ending violence against women and girls proposals before the European Parliament and much wider as well. So we tend to specialise on legal aspects, looking at legal texts, providing amicus briefs, so pro bono briefs to different court judgments and different organisations who are asking for those, and providing specialist knowledge, really. And that's one of the things from the 16 Days of Activism that's really important, not just to look, of course, at societal changes, which we absolutely and fundamentally must have, but also what's lawful and what's possible, and how do we progress legislation that will make all of our lives much, much better.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Here is our complete panel. We will start now the discussions maybe. So since the outbreak of the pandemic, there's been a dramatic increase in recorded cases of violence against women and girls and cases of domestic violence in Europe. The policies of isolation, of lockdowns, have led to increased level of violence inside our homes. 1 in 3 women in the EU aged 15 or over has suffered physical, sexual, or psychological violence. 1 or 2 have been sexually harassed. 1 in 10 has been subject to online harassment. Those numbers are from the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights and are from 2014. And in 2020, there's a new survey that was launched, and we will have the data by 2023. Claire, maybe my first question will be for you. So violence against women has increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. In France, for example, we've had a surge of 32% during the first week of lockdown of reports of domestic violence. Lithuania recorded 20% more reports throughout the first 3 weeks of lockdown. Spain, Spanish authorities reported 18% rise in calls during the first fortnight of confinement. What is your general understanding of the extent of domestic violence since the start of the pandemic?
Thank you, Ines. So the numbers you just gave are quite telling. We have all witnessed a spike in domestic violence, particularly during the first wave, the first lockdown due to COVID. So in 2022, up to 30% in some countries, as you just said. And actually, the UN Women just released a report on the 25th of November, giving a bit of a view on the impact of COVID on women. And it reported that 1 in 2 women reported that they or a woman they know experienced forms of violence since COVID-19. And that actually women feel also less safe in the public space since the beginning of COVID-19, with 40% of women feeling less safe to walk around alone at night since COVID. And this is mostly due, obviously, to the fact that for in the case of domestic violence, to the fact that women can be locked at home with their harasser, their aggressor, but it's also due to the stressful situation and the stress that is put on women's economic independence, access to work, and more generally their economic independence in this period of time. And also to note that the impact of COVID on women and girls is unfortunately very much through violence, but has also multiple aspects. We know that women and girls have been mostly the ones in charge of care duties during this period of time, with not appropriate recognition. And that is something that we want to underline, and really we call on the EU and all to finally recognize the importance of care work, as this crisis has shown to us. So now more than ever, we need a strong response from member states of the EU, but also from the EU to tackle gender-based violence, but also to tackle the other aspects of women's lives that are intricate with violence, because obviously it's more difficult to get out of a violent situation at home if you don't have a job and if you don't have a way to sustain yourself when you leave this home. So this is really a call we have right now to the EU institutions, both for a strong legislation on violence against women and girls, but also thinking about steps to recognize this care work that women and girls do, and through what we call a care deal for Europe.
Thank you very much, Claire. And from this context and from this observation, how does that translate into the grassroots field? Maybe MILENA, you can tell us more about the challenges that the Gender Alternative Foundation has met since the start of the pandemic. How did it address them? And basically how to cope with that increase in violence and rise of victims.
Thank you, Ines, for giving us this opportunity to explain how exactly the cases of violence are increasing and how they are affecting the women and children. Just to give you a couple of numbers, because the numbers are speaking in the best possible manner. So in our yearly work at Gender Alternatives Foundation, we usually have something like 500 counseling sessions of women and children being victims of domestic violence. Last year, in 2020, during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and after the end of the lockdown, we had more than 700 cases for 2020. These are the lives of women and children directly affected because they were locked down together with their abusers in their houses and homes, and they're not having any possible ways of escape and any possible ways of having protection. So in our work as organization dealing with lawyers, psychologists, and social workers, we had to adjust our daily life and work and to become part of the online space of providing those services. So we had to exchange our face-to-face counseling sessions to online sessions. So we have been using all the possible tools that are provided by the technology nowadays. And we were trying to be in contact in any possible way of connection to the women and children being victims of domestic violence. Once the state was open again, we realized that it is not enough for us to provide the counseling sessions that we usually provide, but because of the changes in the social situation of the families of the women and the children, we had to become more of a social service organization as well, because the women and children needed not so much legal advice, social advice, and psychological advice, especially in the beginning of their troubling period, but most of them were in need of having daily provisions. Lots of women lost their jobs. Lots of them being separated with their fathers of their children were not receiving alimony because men also lost their jobs. So for something like 3 months, we have been mainly providing food and different other tools which were needed by the women and the children, especially medicine. But nowadays, speaking from the point of view of 2021, we can say that the number of the legal cases which are initiated before the courts in Bulgaria are 4 times more than usual.
Thank you, MILENA, for highlighting this need and this capacity to adapt and, for example, to go back to online spaces. On this, my next question will be for you, Cindy. So the increase of violence has induced a rise in demand of services from organizations such as MILENA's. Do you believe that the groups that are in charge of helping the victims, the ones that are in danger, are well enough financed to cope for this increase of violence? And also, because as MILENA, you told us, COVID-19 has an impact on survivors' access to a range of essential services, such as social, health, legal services. And the challenges that induces are limited awareness of the existing services women can access, right? Women don't really know about the services available, how to access them, and this is a really important subject to tackle through online tools. So has Meta recognized this issue and taken steps to address it in the digital sphere?
As someone who ran a nonprofit, an NGO that serves survivors of domestic violence for almost 30 years, I can say that NGOs and nonprofits worldwide are underfunded and understaffed. They didn't have capacity to meet all the needs of survivors before the pandemic. And then when you add, as the numbers that everyone has mentioned, this vast increase in need for services during COVID, these nonprofits are struggling. And so when I was in my previous life at the National Network to End Domestic Violence last spring, when COVID began, Facebook reached out to us, UN Women, and the Global Network of Women's Shelters to see if we could pull together resources very rapidly to put online on Facebook, because we know that an abusive partner might not let a victim call a helpline, but they might be fine with her spending time on Facebook connecting with her family. So what we did is NNEDV and UN Women put together resources for people experiencing abuse, and then also resources for loved ones if you're concerned about a family member or a friend. And we put those in the Facebook COVID Information Hub very prominently so that you could find those tips if you needed them. And then in addition, the Global Network of Women's Shelters and UN Women and NNEDV pulled together helplines globally to put into Facebook to have a list of all the helplines. You can find it by searching domestic violence helplines in Facebook, and you'll find it. It's very similar to the directory that Women Against Violence Europe has for all of Europe, but we know that every region and every continent doesn't have a WAVE network directory. So in fact, the GNWS is also currently building Lila.help to provide a WAVE type directory globally. And then lastly, one of the things that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, did is we partnered with NGOs across the region. So we put together a WhatsApp bot in Argentina and Chile to make sure that if somebody needed help, maybe they could chat much more safely than they could actually call, because if their partner was in the next room, you really just cannot talk about the abuse in your life and the help you need. One of the other things we did is we ran a video series talking about how you can reach out safely to someone that you're worried about. And obviously you don't want to call and directly ask, are you in danger? Because if the partner is listening, that could be, very, it could escalate the risk. But one of the things we recommended is find a safe way to connect. And maybe that's through chat, maybe that's through a fun activity, maybe it's calling to ask for a recipe, or maybe it's playing Words with Friends and there's a chat function within Words with Friends. So you could then quietly ask, are you okay? Do you need anything? So one of the things that we've been doing across the globe is partnering with nonprofits and NGOs like MILENA's to make sure that those victim advocates who are doing really life-saving work know how they can safely reach out when it's just not safe anymore to do phone calls.
Thank you so much, Cindy. We will go back to Meta's action and the digital space's responsibilities in this surge of violence crisis. Maybe now we will focus a bit more on the Istanbul Convention. So the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, that's the whole name of the Istanbul Convention, is celebrating this year its 10th anniversary since opening for signature. And it basically equips countries to prevent violence against women, because obviously states have a heavy responsibility in tackling this issue. And it presents numerous measures in the prevention, protection, prosecution, and the coordination of policies of different states. Jackie, can you tell us maybe a bit more about the Istanbul Convention and about what is the best way to use it now at this time of increased violence against women and girls?
Sure, thank you. Well, the Istanbul Convention, as you said, was passed about 10 or so years ago, and it's been signed and ratified by a number of countries across Europe, and signatories from outside of the Council of Europe as well. So it's a Council of Europe Convention, 47 members of the Council of Europe. It's wider than the European Union. The European Union has also signed it, but hasn't ratified it yet. And I don't know if we're going to come back to that point or not, but certainly have something to say about that. The Istanbul Convention is a victim-centered human rights convention. And that means that the way it looks is different to, for example, the international, the Palermo Protocol, the convention, UN Convention dealing with human trafficking. And what I mean by that is not criminal justice based, it's a human rights protection based. So there's lots of provisions about providing shelters, providing phone lines, providing prevention measures, and ensuring that there's awareness raising, and migrant women are covered as well. So there's an awful lot of provisions there that are victim-centered or survivor-centered, and that's the approach that is the most prevalent. When it comes to trying to use the Istanbul Convention in best or good practice, then it really depends on which country you're in and what kind of facilities and shelters, etc., are available in the country that we're talking about. In a general way, so I can talk about it in a general way, I think sustainable funding for those shelters, as we heard earlier on, is extremely important. And when I was in the Parliament, I pushed for that in the European Union, at least. I think that's a really important aspect, and I don't think it can be underestimated how much women's shelters have such poor facilities because of lack of funding, and we need that. I think the other way that the Istanbul can be used to help with ending violence against women and girls is the reach the law has within the home. Now that we're all, or nearly all, working from home, living at home, living in each other's pockets, it would be wrong to say that the law doesn't reach into what we euphemistically call reach into the bedroom, so reach into the home. It absolutely does, and the Istanbul Convention helps with that. Why? Because domestic abuse, domestic violence happens a lot in the home, and it's not just the people involved in it, it's also those who witness it. So it's making sure that women, girls, boys are also protected, and the prevention measures in there are extremely good as well. So it's reaching into the home and letting people come out of the home in order to be helped. But I think the number one thing is awareness raising, and the Istanbul Convention has a lot of articles with regard to awareness raising. I would suggest television, radio, Instagram, Facebook, and all of those measures that people actually access, making sure we don't have any misinformation either about the misgendering, etc. there. So there are a whole host of measures, and very excitedly, Grevio, which is the monitoring committee of the Istanbul Convention, has come out with a general recommendation number 1 just a few days ago. I don't know if you'll come on to that, but that talks about the digital sphere as well. So making sure that that's implemented within domestic legislation as well. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And as you mentioned, so the EU signed the document in 2017, but has not acceded to it. And Poland actually announced its intention to withdraw from the instrument. So maybe what are your views on this? And additionally, in March 2021, Turkey became the first country to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, and numerous conservative parties in European countries are opposed to the ratification of the convention because it presumably clashes with their traditional values. What can be done to avoid such a situation and diminish the attention of denunciation as a whole? And do you believe that there is a correlation between the levels of violence and the willingness of withdrawal in such states?
Those are quite big questions. Yeah. But I certainly think that when it comes to the Istanbul Convention and the EU accession or ratification of it, the European Court of Justice in October of this year has come out with its opinion about that. It has given the green light for the EU to ratify. It's possible to do it. It did recommend that all member states should ratify it, but it didn't stop anyone from, it didn't say, no, you cannot ratify the Istanbul Convention as the EU, as a whole body, unless everyone has ratified it. So I think that's a step in the right direction. It's a cautious approach, but courts usually are very conservative in many respects. The European Court of Justice has not been when it comes to gender, pay, etc., but that was a long time ago. But it has been very conservative more recently in certain aspects. So I would suggest that that's one of the things that is pushed now, and I think that's on the cards, that's being pushed to ratify it at EU level. Why I think that's important and can impact on other areas that we're talking about today and other organizations that we're talking about today is because I would suggest that there's a possibility then of tying the funding aspect, the sustainable funding aspects, to implementation of the Istanbul Convention. It seems like a very radical thing to say, but it isn't really, because Articles 2 and 3 of the treaties of the European Union, as they have been since 1957 in the treaties and amended, of course, as well, have made the equality between men and women a fundamental right and a fundamental value of the European Union. In order to progress that finally to get it to equality, if a country wants recovery monies, then it should ensure that the Istanbul Convention's principles and articles are correctly implemented. And that is one of the obligations, in my view, under Articles 2 and 3, to reach equality between men and women. So I think those things are fundamental. And that then hopefully skirts around the possibility of other countries coming out of the Istanbul Convention, certainly at EU level. It's a political decision, though. This is not a legal solution. It's a political one. And I would suggest that the solutions are political. So you need to make alliances and you have to have a tough way forward, because we've been going around this block for about 10 years, haven't we? And we've got to have resolution. It's unacceptable to increase the violence and let it happen. And the message has to be, it's no longer affordable to ignore domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, because you are not going to get your funding unless you stop ignoring it.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for this. Still on this Istanbul Convention topic, maybe Claire. So between 2019 and 2020, the European Women's Lobby developed a report about the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in the countries that have ratified it, and assessed the information from 31 state parties to the convention, and also identified additional forms of violence against women and girls, which the convention did not take into consideration, maybe. What are your findings and recommendations based on this report?
So yes, in a nutshell, because it's quite a long report, which was quite a substantiated research by experts in the observatory. So there's quite a lot of findings, and if you're interested, I would really invite you to look into it. It's on the EWL website. So the study was very much looking into what are the great achievements from the ratification and the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in the countries that have ratified, obviously. So 21 countries in the EU. And the results were really telling that you had like really an increase, a lot of positive changes thanks to the implementation, even partial, of the Istanbul Convention in those countries. So you might know that the Istanbul Convention is divided in 4 sections called the 4 Ps, integrated policies, prosecution, prevention, and protection. And on all those 4 Ps, there's been positive changes to a high level, from 61% to 96% of positive changes on these 4 Ps. So really clearly, if the Istanbul Convention is ratified and implemented in countries, it has a substantial effect on the life of women and girls who are victims of violence. So that was the first findings we wanted to put forward, like a positive message that could come from the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. Obviously, there's still a lot to do, and you've referred to it in part, Ines, and Jackie Jones already did. We have seen that in some of the countries that have ratified, the implementation is not full, is not perfect. Some reserves by countries to the Istanbul Convention also might hinder the impact of the implementation of the convention. So really, we are calling on full ratification with no reserves to the convention. We are also calling for the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in a gender-sensitive way, because that's really the spirit of the convention. The convention clearly states that violence against women and girls is a form of discrimination against women and girls, that it is rooted in the patriarchal system, and also that it is a violation of human rights. So it's necessary that this aspect is reflected in the legislation that transposes the Istanbul Convention in national law. Obviously, as said also before, we are not there yet at the EU level on the accession to the Istanbul Convention. This is of deep worry for us. The convention has been signed but not accessed, ratified at EU level. We have hopes from the latest European Court of Justice decision that hopefully might unlock the ratification at the EU level, and we are really going to be working hard in calling the next presidency of the Council, the French presidency, to put back the Istanbul Convention on the agenda of the Council, because it's high time again that the EU moves forward on the accession to the Convention. And also, we are calling on the European Commission in drafting this new legislation that has been announced by President von der Leyen multiple times. We are calling on them to take on board the golden standards of the Istanbul Convention and take a step forward, bring it beyond, bringing further. Because as you said, the Istanbul Convention was drafted 10 years ago now. And unfortunately, the forms of violence have developed. They are all part of the same continuum, all deeply rooted in the same structural imbalance of power between women and men, but take new forms. And one of those new forms, as our colleague from Meta said, is unfortunately online violence. So we would like this law by the European Commission to cover also online violence, and also to cover sexual exploitation of women, which is considered as the EU crime already, but has no legislation so far at the EU level. So there's still quite a lot to do, while including all the golden standards from the Istanbul Convention in this law. So that's our call right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire, on highlighting the responsibility of states and the European Union towards the Istanbul Convention. Maybe more on the NGO perspective, Milena, could you tell us more about how does the Gender Alliance Foundation engage or benefit from the Istanbul Convention?
Thank you, Ines. But I should firstly say that unfortunately, Bulgaria is one of the countries which decided not to ratify the Istanbul Convention. And probably I should clarify for the public that in the beginning of 2018, the current government decided to put for ratification in the parliament the convention, but then there was a huge public outcry on the so-called traditional values, which were against the understanding of the Bulgarian family, which showed complete lack of understanding what gender-based violence means, what is the impact of violence against women and girls on the whole society, not only on the victims themselves and on their relatives, but also on the people in the country, and how it affects us financially also and economically, how much money we spend as taxpayers in order to solve those cases in the police, in the prosecution, in the court. But in July 2018, the Bulgarian Constitutional Court was seized, and it ruled that the Istanbul Convention is not in compliance with the Bulgarian Constitution, which legally means that for the moment, Bulgaria cannot ratify the Istanbul Convention and cannot use all the high standards for human rights protection that it includes. For these reasons, we as NGOs, especially in the Gender Alternatives Foundation, are trying to find alternative ways to solve the situation of the women and girls being victims of violence. And for that reason, we have been part of several working groups in the parliament, in the different ministries, working on amendments and changes in the existing legislation, because if we cannot use the convention directly in the national legislation, then we can try at least to put its standards in the national legislation that is already in existence in the country. We had a very turbulent political year in 2021. We had 3 times elections for the parliament and for the government. Now we are at the stage that hopefully by the end of the year we will be having a new government formed as a coalition of 4 political parties. It will be interesting to see what will be their reaction in the field of gender-based violence. There is a good positive sign because the leading political party which won the election was having an official statement for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, in the sense that they are against all forms of gender-based violence, and they would like to take the effective measures that the women and children in this country need. So we'll be hoping for their, of course, reaction on the subject next year. But at the same time, we can promise them, like we usually do, we are not going to give up on our causes, and we are not going to give up our attempts to change the legislation and the practice and the financial services provided by the state. So the fight is on.
Thank you, Milena. And yes, it's interesting to see, of course, how for NGOs the fight is on both in helping victims and in pushing for states' regulation to change. And in terms of regulation, the EU has other tools to guide states' response to this surge of violence, right? On March the 5th of 2020, the Commission adopted its gender equality strategy for 2020 to 2025. Clary mentioned that Ursula von der Leyen said that a proposal will be on the table of the Commission early next year to tackle violence against women and girls as well. And the Commission has launched in February 2021 an open public consultation on a new legislative initiative to better support the victim and to prosecute perpetrators of gender-based violence. And the Commission also addressed the issue of online violence with its proposal for a Digital Services Act that was adopted in December 2020, which clarifies the responsibilities of online platforms and contributes to make the internet safer for women. On this digital act and maybe on the framework that is taken by the technology platforms to ensure transparency and to ensure reporting mechanisms, that those mechanisms are in place. Maybe Cindy, you could tell us a bit more, because obviously violence against women and girls when it's online is overlapping with other phenomena, which are misogynistic discourses and gendered disinformation. And we know that gender norms and roles are greatly influenced by the mass media, right? And there is a strong link between the status of women and the way society treats women through the media and the perception we have of them. So how does Meta stand in terms of having this legislative regulatory framework? How do you think that would shape Meta's action and maybe ensure that the social media platforms remove the harmful material, protect women from inappropriate content, support restitution, help for survivors? Could you tell us maybe a bit more about that, although you started telling us earlier?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I'm going to cover it in sort of 3 components. And the first is just to say that we know that violence against women is pervasive across society. It happens online, it happens in offices and homes and on the street. And we also know it disproportionately impacts women with intersectional identities. So trans women, women of color, Muslim women. And so it is vital that we all work together with the private sector. So Meta, government institutions, parliaments, and the NGO sector to really come together to figure out how do we tackle this problem that is socially constructed and can be socially deconstructed. And so with that, when I joined Facebook, now called Meta, a little over a year ago, one of the things that I wanted to do was continue to improve our policies, our technology, the way that we address and handle and combat violence against women. And so while I had the opportunity to see for 10 years improvements that Facebook was making in my nonprofit role, I also knew that we can do more. And that is why I joined the company. And I'm proud of the efforts we're working on, but we know we don't always get it right. And we're striving every day. Just a couple of things about the work that we're doing. we're enhancing our policies. So just a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we've increased our protections around sexual harassment, mass and coordinated harassment, and also protections for journalists and activists, because we know that they're frequently targeted. So we're working on our policy approach. We also, in our comprehensive approach, we look at tools. So what can we do from a technology standpoint? Proactive detection is very important to us, because ideally we want to remove toxic and threatening and harassing content before it's reported to us. So we're up to, for hate speech, we're over 95% of hate speech is removed by our machine learning classifiers before anyone reports it to us. So we're constantly working to improve those technology tools. And then another tool that I'm very excited about is our work to combat the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. Actually, years ago, we started a pilot with a handful of NGOs, several in Europe, the UK Revenge Porn Helpline. We've onboarded the Belgian Institute for Equality of Women and Men, Promesso Negato in Italy, out of Antutz in France. And we're working with these NGOs to help survivors of image-based abuse be able to proactively get their images hashed with the digital fingerprint so that they can't be posted or reshared on Facebook or Instagram. So those are the types of technology tools we're working on. And then we're also constantly working on resources and working with our partners. In fact, we work with over 850 safety partners worldwide. Many of them are in Europe. But the second component I wanted to talk about is, in my nonprofit experience, one of the things we saw is that violence against women occurs in many different ways. Often there'll be physical abuse in the home, there'll be online death threats. And one of the benefits of having evidence that a victim might know how to save if she's working with a nonprofit like MILENA's is that as we train more and more judges to understand that a death threat online is as serious, if not more so, than a death threat behind closed doors in your home, that we're seeing judges hold those perpetrators accountable. And often we're now seeing judges put no contact, including online contact, into protection orders. And so I think we have an immense responsibility as Meta to make sure that we are doing everything within our power, and we're partnering with civil society to change that culture, to completely rewrite what is considered appropriate and normal behavior. And at the same time, we're very proudly partnering with nonprofits that are helping victims save evidence and get accountability and convictions when perpetrators misuse technology.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for highlighting how vital the collaboration is between those big digital platforms, non-for-profits, and obviously the states. So before closing this panel, maybe we'll take one question from the public. This is a question from Anna Debeki, and she is asking, is there a system in place that allows for fundraising of private funds to support the shelters? I don't know if one of you would like to answer this question.
I'm happy to take that one.
Yeah.
So there's actually a Facebook fundraiser function on Facebook. So if your nonprofit has a Facebook page, not a profile, you'll want to do a page for the NGO, you can actually put your bank account details in and get donations. And I just donated to my former employer, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, this morning, because since it's Giving Tuesday in the US and globally, Facebook is matching 2 million initially, and then another total of 8 million globally for fundraisers that are done today on Giving Tuesday. So definitely you can also do GoFundMe and all sorts of other ways, but I would be remiss if I didn't encourage your nonprofit to use Facebook fundraisers if possible.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else has an answer to give regarding the fundings of organizations and shelters.
Maybe just to say one sentence, because this is a responsibility of the state mainly, but not all of the states are performing their duties. And just to give you the Bulgarian example very quickly, 3 years ago, we were receiving funding from the state for 6 months only, for only 1 day per week. Last year, when the COVID-19 spread, we got funding for 5 months. And this year, in 2021, when the number of cases of murder of women are in the rise, we are having 4 months funding. So before asking for donors funding, let us ask our own states, what are they doing for supporting their victims of violence, and how are they funding the NGOs providing social services in that regard?
Thank you so much, Milena. Claire, maybe yes.
Yeah, actually, as we touch upon this, and we have mentioned already quite extensively how important it is to found women's organizations, found shelter, because those organizations, as Milena just unfortunately underlined, are really, really struggling with funding. I'd like to underline a number that the European Institute for Gender Equality has put light on, which is the cost of gender-based violence in the EU. It's actually at almost 226 billion euros, which is a cost that we could avoid, that could be avoided by society if countries, states indeed were really taking it seriously. And AYYADI adds to that a comparison with the costs of specialized services. And this is actually 3%. So let me just read the sentence, that's going to be clear. The spending on special services to mitigate the harms and prevent the repetition of the violence is 3% of the cost of intimate partner violence against women. So actually the cost of services is really, really low compared to what letting violence against women and girls happen in society is. So if the human rights argument can't be heard by our decision makers, let's hope at least the economic reasoning will be.
Absolutely. Thank you to all of you for all your work, for your insight, for this push towards states in taking action and ratifying the convention, in financing the field actors that are every day tackling gender-based violence. And thank you for everyone who's watching the event. Please remember to follow, if you've enjoyed the event, the pages of the European Movement International and the European Women's Lobby, and to follow tomorrow's 6th annual ceremony of the of the Women of Europe Awards, that will take place tomorrow online at 4 p.m. Thank you, and we will see you very soon. Have a good day.